An elderly person passed away without leaving a will. When their greedy grandchildren went to claim their inheritance, they were shocked to find out that the funeral home's mahogany doors burst open as Rachel Harrison stormed in, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor like angry percussion. Her face, usually perfectly composed for her high-end real estate clients, was twisted with rage. "This is unacceptable, completely unacceptable," she shrieked, her voice echoing through the viewing room. "My grandfather was worth millions, and you dress him like a grocery store bag boy?" The funeral director, Mrs. Collins, stepped back, clutching her clipboard. "Ms. Harrison, these were the clothes your grandfather specifically. I don't care what he requested. Look at this hideous blue vest with that tacky name tag. Bill, happy to serve you? Are you kidding me?" Rachel grabbed the lapel of the powder blue SuperValue employee vest, her manicured fingers trembling. Michael Harrison hurried in behind her, his $1,000 suit catching the afternoon sun. "Rachel, stop making a scene." "A scene?" She spun toward her brother. "You're a hotshot lawyer in Manhattan, Michael. How are you not mortified by this? Our colleagues will be here any minute." Mrs. Collins cleared her throat. "Mr. Harrison chose this outfit himself. He was very specific." "He was senile," Rachel snapped. "Clearly losing his mind, working as a bag boy at 78. This is humiliating." An elderly woman arranging flowers nearby dropped her bouquet. "Bill Harrison wasn't senile, young lady. He was the kindest soul who ever worked at that store. He helped me carry my groceries every Tuesday, rain or shine." "Oh, wonderful," Rachel threw her hands up. "Our millionaire grandfather was your personal porter. Did he tell you he owned the entire chain of stores?" Michael grabbed her arm. "That's enough, Rachel." "No, it's not enough." She jerked away, mascara-tinged tears, threatening to fall. "Remember last Christmas? That disastrous dinner at Le Bernardin, when he showed up in that same ridiculous vest? Rachel, he embarrassed us in front of everyone. The maitre d' thought he was a lost delivery man. And now this? His final appearance? And he's dressed like minimum wage help?" A small crowd had gathered at the doorway, whispers rippling through the assembled mourners. Michael's face reddened as he recognized several business associates. "Mrs. Collins," he said quietly, "surely we can find something more appropriate. A suit, perhaps." The funeral director stood her ground. "Mr. Harrison left explicit instructions. He wanted to be buried in his work clothes." "Work clothes?" Rachel laughed bitterly. "He owned 47 supermarkets. This isn't work clothes. This is some bizarre senior citizen hobby gone wrong. He didn't need to work." "Maybe he wanted to," a voice came from the back. Sarah Thompson stood in the doorway, her waitress uniform still on from her shift. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Who invited the help?" "Your grandfather did," Sarah replied softly. "He made me promise to come." Before Rachel could respond, the clicking of expensive shoes announced another arrival. James Porter, impeccably dressed in a black suit, appeared in the doorway, his leather briefcase held tight. "Ms. Harrison, Mr. Harrison," he nodded to the siblings. "I'm afraid we need to discuss some urgent matters regarding your grandfather's estate." "Finally," Rachel smoothed her dress. "Someone who can sort out this mess. You're Bill's lawyer, correct? Tell them they need to change these clothes immediately." Porter's face remained impassive. "Actually, I'm here about something far more pressing than your grandfather's choice of attire. There's a document you both need to see." Michael stepped forward. "The will?" A small, enigmatic smile crossed Porter's face. "Not exactly, but I promise you, this will change everything you think you know about William Harrison." Rachel looked at her grandfather's peaceful face, the name tag glinting under the funeral home lights. For a moment, something like doubt crossed her features, but she quickly steeled herself. "Whatever it is, it can wait until we fix this embarrassment," she insisted, turning back to Mrs. Collins. "Now, about that suit. James Porter's office felt suffocating despite its generous size. Rachel paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, while Michael sat rigidly in a leather chair, his knuckles white against the armrests. "What do you mean there's no will?" Rachel's voice cracked. "That's impossible. Bill was a business genius." Porter spread several documents across his mahogany desk. "Your grandfather sold the entire SuperValue chain 3 years ago. All 47 stores." Michael leaned forward. "Sold? To whom?" "National Foods Corporation. The sale price was $50 million. Rachel stopped pacing. "50 million? Yes," Porter nodded, sliding forward a thick folder. "The transaction was completely legal and properly documented." Michael flipped through the papers, his lawyer's eyes scanning rapidly. "These are bank statements. Monthly withdrawals." "Enormous withdrawals," Porter confirmed. "Almost clockwork. Every month, large sums disappeared from the account." Rachel snatched the statements. 200,000 here, 300,000 there. What was he doing? Gambling? Was he being blackmailed? "We found no evidence of either," Porter replied calmly. "Then where's the money?" Rachel's voice rose hysterically. "There should be millions left." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Thompson stood in the doorway, still in her waitress uniform, clutching her purse like a shield. "I'm sorry, Mr. Porter. Your secretary said I could come in." Rachel whirled around. "What are you doing here?" "This is a private meeting, Ms. Thompson was specifically requested to be here," Porter said firmly. "By your grandfather." Michael stood up. "The diner waitress? Why?" Sarah's chin lifted slightly. "I knew Bill. The real Bill." "The real Bill?" Rachel laughed harshly. "Please. You served him coffee. We're his family." "Really?" Sarah's voice was quiet but steady. "When was the last time you visited him at his apartment?" Rachel waved dismissively. "That ridiculous little place? He could have lived anywhere. He owned a penthouse in Manhattan, for God's sake." "Which he sold 4 years ago," Porter interjected, producing another document. Michael's face paled. "He sold the penthouse too?" "Along with the house in the Hamptons and the condo in Aspen," Porter confirmed. "All the properties were liquidated before the supermarket sale." Rachel collapsed into a chair. "This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense." "Perhaps," Sarah spoke up. "You didn't know your grandfather as well as you thought." "And you did?" Rachel snapped. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph. "This was taken last Christmas, the one you mentioned at the funeral." The photo showed Bill in his SuperValue vest, surrounded by a group of smiling people in a small diner. "After you left him at Le Bernardin," Sarah continued, "he came to the diner. We had our own Christmas dinner. He said it was the best holiday he'd had in years." Michael took the photo, his hands trembling slightly. "Who are all these people?" "People who knew the real Bill Harrison," Sarah replied. "People who—" "Enough," Rachel interrupted. "This is ridiculous. There has to be more to the estate. Investments, offshore accounts, something." Porter shook his head. "The only remaining asset is his apartment and its contents. Everything else was sold or distributed." "Distributed?" Michael's legal instincts kicked in. "What exactly do you mean by distributed?" Before Porter could answer, his phone buzzed. "Excuse me, but there's something you need to see at your grandfather's apartment. Both of you." Rachel stood up, smoothing her designer dress. "Fine. Let's get this over with. There has to be some explanation for all of this." As they headed for the door, Sarah's quiet voice stopped them. "There is an explanation, and it's going to change everything you think you know about wealth, about success, and about your grandfather." Michael turned back. "Why are you really here, Ms. Thompson?" Sarah's eyes met his. "Because Bill Harrison saved my life, and I'm not the only one." Porter cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed to the apartment? I believe you'll find the answers you're looking for there, though they might not be the answers you expect." Rachel grabbed her purse, her movement sharp with anger. "This is just another one of his games." "It has to be." The money has to be somewhere. But as they left the office, neither sibling could shake the feeling that their grandfather's final surprise was only beginning to unfold. The door to Bill Harrison's modest apartment creaked open, revealing a space that seemed impossibly small for a man who once commanded a business empire. Rachel's heel caught on the worn welcome mat as she entered, causing her to stumble. "This is depressing," she muttered, taking in the dated furniture and simple decor. Michael moved past her to the living room, where cardboard boxes lined the walls. "What's all this?" Porter picked up one of the boxes. "Your grandfather's records. He kept everything meticulously organized." "Tax records?" Michael asked, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. "Not exactly." Porter opened the box and pulled out a folder. "This might interest you, Michael. It's about the Watson family." The color drained from Michael's face. "Tom Watson? Your firm's former maintenance man," Porter confirmed. 20 years of service, wasn't it? Rachel rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, not this again." Michael did what any competent lawyer would do. The man was a liability. A liability? A new voice joined them. Sarah Thompson stood in the doorway, holding another box. "Is that what you call someone who dedicated 2 decades of his life to your company?" Michael's jaw tightened. "That situation was complicated." "Was it?" Sarah opened her box, pulling out a stack of medical bills. "These are from Boston Children's Hospital, Tom's daughter Emily's cancer treatments, all paid in full." "What does this have to do with our grandfather?" Rachel demanded. "Everything." Porter handed Michael a letter. "Read it." Michael's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. "Dear Anonymous Angel, I don't know who you are, but you saved my daughter's life. After I lost my job and insurance, I thought we would lose Emily too. The doctor said, without immediate treatment. I can't even write those words. Then mysteriously, all our medical bills were paid. Emily starts high school next month. Every time she smiles, I thank God for you. Forever grateful, Tom Watson." "No," Michael whispered. "It can't be." Rachel snatched another folder, her eyes widening as she read. 12 families? He helped 12 families? "All people whose lives were affected by your decisions," Porter confirmed. "Look at the dates, Rachel. Every time you executed a strategic eviction for your luxury developments." He was following us, Michael realized, watching what we did. "More like cleaning up after you," Sarah corrected. "You know what Bill told me once?" He said, "Money is like water. It can either nourish or drown." Rachel's hands trembled as she opened another folder. "These are my deals. Every single one. The Thompson Heights development, the Riverside apartments. Where you evicted 30 families to build luxury condos." Sarah's voice was sharp. "Yes, he kept track of those too." A letter fluttered from the folder, and Rachel caught it reflexively. Her face paled as she read, "Dear Guardian Angel, when Mrs. Harrison told me I had 30 days to leave my home of 40 years, I thought my life was over. Then you appeared, bought my mortgage, and told me I could stay as long as I wanted. You saved more than my home. You saved my dignity. With eternal gratitude, Margaret Chen P.S. The cookies are for you. The recipe is 70 years old, just like me." "There's more," Porter said quietly, gesturing to the remaining boxes. "Much more." Michael picked up a worn leather journal from the desk. His diary. "Michael, don't," Rachel started, but he was already reading. "Today, I watched my grandson destroy another family's future with a single signature." Rachel celebrated her largest commission yet by buying a new sports car. "Where did I go wrong? What turned my own flesh and blood so cold?" "Stop it!" Rachel's voice cracked. "We did nothing wrong. Business is business." "Is that what you told yourself?" Sarah asked softly. "When you looked in the mirror each morning?" Michael continued reading, his voice growing hoarse. "I've built an empire on the belief that success and compassion could coexist. But my grandchildren, they've twisted everything I taught them. Perhaps it's time for one last lesson. The prodigy, Porter began, but caught himself. There's something else you need to see. Rachel stumbled to a chair, her designer dress crumpling. Why? Why did he do all this? Because, Sarah said, he never stopped being your grandfather, even when you stopped being his grandchildren. Michael closed the diary, his hand lingering on its worn cover. There's a page marked for today. Don't, Rachel whispered, but her brother was already turning to it. The room fell silent as Michael stared at the page, his hands beginning to shake. Rachel finally stood and looked over his shoulder, a small gasp escaping her lips. What is it? Sarah asked. But before either sibling could answer, Porter's phone chimed. It's time, he said quietly. Are you ready to learn about the project? Michael and Rachel exchanged glances, their carefully constructed masks finally beginning to crack under the weight of their grandfather's truth. The marked page in Bill's diary trembled in Michael's hands as he read aloud. Terminal diagnosis confirmed today. 6 months, maybe less. Dr. Patterson says I should tell the family, but what family? My grandchildren visit my grave more often than they visited me alive. Rachel sank deeper into the worn armchair, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric. 6 months? He knew for 6 months? Keep reading, Porter urged quietly. Michael's voice cracked as he continued. Time to accelerate the plan. The cancer's spreading faster than expected, but there's still so much work to do. So many wrongs to right before I go. Stop, Rachel whispered, but Michael pressed on. Rachel came by the store today, didn't recognize me behind the register, or pretended not to. Watched her buy $300 worth of wine for her real estate celebration. Another family evicted, another commission. If she only knew that family was eating at the shelter tonight. I said stop, Rachel shot up, snatching the diary. As she did, several papers fell from between its pages. Sarah bent to collect them, her eyes widening. These are medical records, she said. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and the dates. She looked up, face pale. He was working those long shifts at the supermarket while undergoing chemotherapy. Michael slumped against the wall. Why didn't he tell us? Would you have cared? Sarah's question hung in the air like smoke. Rachel was frantically flipping through the diary's final pages. There has to be something about the money. He couldn't have just given it all away. He couldn't. She stopped suddenly, staring at a page. What is it? Michael asked. It's about me. Her voice shook as she read. Found Rachel's associate in my apartment today. Offered me $100,000 to sign some papers. My own granddaughter trying to declare me incompetent. Wanting control of everything before I could waste more money on charity. If she only knew. Michael's head snapped up. You did what? I was trying to protect his assets. Rachel's composure cracked. He was giving everything away. Someone had to stop him. By having him declared incompetent? Michael advanced on his sister. Was that before or after you tried to bribe Porter to change the estate documents? Rachel's face went white. How did you? Your assistant called my office by mistake last week, Michael spat. Left quite an interesting message about adjusting grandfather's papers. You don't understand, Rachel's voice rose hysterically. I had to do something. Do you know what people were saying? That the great Bill Harrison had lost his mind working as a bag boy? That his granddaughter couldn't even take care of him properly? Sarah's quiet voice cut through the tension. Or maybe you couldn't bear that he saw through your facade. What facade? Rachel whirled on her. The one where you pretend money makes you better than everyone else, Sarah replied. Bill told me about the day you closed your first $1 million deal. How you used to be different before. Before what? Before you started measuring your worth by your bank account. A knock at the door startled them all. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman from the funeral, stood there, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said softly. I had to come. You need to know about Emily. Emily? Michael's voice was barely a whisper. My daughter, Mrs. Thompson's voice broke. After the eviction notice from Rachel's firm, she couldn't take it. The stress? The room fell silent, broken only by the soft thud of Rachel's knees hitting the floor. The diary, Michael suddenly said, reaching for it. There's something else. Look at this notation. Final protocol, document D7. Porter nodded gravely. Yes, your grandfather knew this day would come. Every detail, every revelation, it was all carefully orchestrated. Orchestrated? Rachel looked up from the floor. What do you mean? He knew you both better than you knew yourselves, Sarah said softly. Every move you'd make, every excuse you'd give, he planned for all of it. Michael stared at the final diary entry, dated just days before Bill's death. The stage is set. The truth will be their inheritance. God forgive me for what I'm about to do to my grandchildren, but sometimes the greatest act of love is to hold up a mirror. The room fell silent as the weight of their grandfather's final, deadly secret settled over them all. Outside, a church bell tolled in the distance, marking the hour of truth. Rachel's phone buzzed incessantly as she paced her luxury office, each notification making her flinch. The Wall Street Journal headline glared from her computer screen. Harrison Real Estate Empire under investigation, predatory practices exposed. Turn it off, she screamed at her assistant through the intercom. Turn everything off. But the damage was already done. Her phone lit up with another message, this time from her biggest client, Ms. Harrison, in light of recent allegations, terminating our contract immediately. Reputation concerns. She hurled the phone across the room, watching it shatter against her Realtor of the Year award. Ms. Harrison? Her assistant's trembling voice came through the intercom. Channel 7 is in the lobby. They're asking about the Thompson case. No comment. Rachel's voice cracked. No, just no more. Her computer pinged with a new email. Reluctantly, she clicked. Dear Ms. Harrison, my name is Emily Thompson. You probably don't remember me. I was just another number in your eviction statistics. But I remember you. I remember your red-soled shoes clicking against our floor as you told my mother we had 48 hours to leave our home of 30 years. I'm a journalist now, and I have documentation of every illegal eviction, every falsified inspection report, every bribed official. Your grandfather kept meticulous records. This is your legacy, Ms. Harrison. And now everyone will know. Emily. Across town, Michael sat in his corner office at Harrison and Mitchell Law, staring at a similar email from the managing partner. Michael, the Watson case has become a liability, a major liability. Our clients are asking questions about our firm's ethics, questions I can't answer. You have 1 hour to decide. Either you personally handle the eviction of the Watson family from their current residence, proving your loyalty to the firm, or clean out your office. Choose wisely. Richard, his desk phone buzzed. Mr. Harrison? Mr. Watson is here to see you. Michael loosened his tie, feeling the walls closing in. Send him in. Tom Watson looked older than Michael remembered, his former maintenance uniform replaced by worn jeans and a faded shirt. His eyes, though, were clear and steady. Your grandfather visited me last month, Tom said without preamble. Showed me everything. The medical bills he paid. The college fund he set up for my daughter. He knew what was coming. Michael's hands trembled. Tom, Save it. Tom cut him off. I'm not here about the past. I'm here about right now. Did you know your firm is trying to evict my entire building? 30 families, Michael, including Sarah Thompson's mother. The blood drained from Michael's face. What? Check your email. The paperwork's probably sitting in your inbox right now, waiting for your signature. Tom's voice hardened. Your grandfather said you'd have to make a choice someday. Guess that day is today. Michael's computer chimed. New email from Richard. Eviction documents attached. Sign immediately. Your future at the firm depends on it. In her office, Rachel's world continued to crumble. Her phone somehow survived the throw, lighting up with social media notifications. Dr. Harrison scandal. Trending, real estate queen's empire built on lies. Bill Harrison's granddaughter exposed. Victims share stories of Harrison's predatory practices. A video link appeared. Sarah Thompson, standing in front of Rachel's office building, surrounded by former tenants. Bill Harrison showed us the truth. Sarah's voice rang clear through Rachel's speakers. Every illegal eviction, every falsified document, every family destroyed, and now we're showing everyone else. Rachel's assistant buzzed again. Ms. Harrison, the DA's office is on line 1. Something about fraud charges. The phone slipped from Rachel's hand as she stared out her office window at the growing crowd below. Signs waved in the air. Justice for Harrison's victims and greed has a price. In his office, Michael stared at the eviction documents, his cursor hovering over the signature line. Tom Watson waited silently, watching the inner battle play out on his former boss's face. The intercom buzzed again. Mr. Harrison, the managing partner wants your decision. Now. Michael looked up at Tom, seeing for the first time the weight of his past decisions reflected in the older man's eyes. His grandfather's words from the diary echoed in his mind. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is to hold up a mirror. Outside both their offices, the city moved on, unaware that the mighty Harrison empire was crumbling. Not from external forces, but from the weight of its own sins, carefully documented and preserved by a bag boy in a blue vest who saw everything and forgave nothing. The price of greed was finally coming due, and payment would be extracted in full. The conference room in James Porter's office felt smaller than ever as Rachel and Michael sat across from each other, neither meeting the other's eyes. Between them lay a thick manila envelope marked Project Grace. Before we open this, Porter began, there's something you need to see. He placed a laptop on the table and pressed play. Bill Harrison's face filled the screen, looking tired but determined in his SuperValue vest. My dear grandchildren, he began, if you're watching this, then everything has happened exactly as I planned. Rachel's empire is crumbling, and Michael's moral crisis has reached its peak. Rachel flinched while Michael's jaw tightened. But this isn't about punishment, Bill continued. It's about choice. Inside this envelope, you'll find details of Project Grace. $10 million remains of my fortune. It's yours, but with conditions. Porter paused the video and opened the envelope. The terms are non-negotiable, he said, sliding documents across the table. Rachel snatched the papers, her eyes widening. This is insane. We have to quit our jobs, run some charity foundation together? This is blackmail. This is redemption, Porter corrected. Both of you, together, or neither gets anything. Michael read through the document slowly. Full-time commitment, strict ethical guidelines, unanimous decisions required for all operations. I won't do it, Rachel stood up. I won't let him control us from the grave. Miss Harrison, a quiet voice came from the doorway. Sarah Thompson stood there with Tom Watson. Your grandfather wanted us here for this part. More guilt? Rachel laughed bitterly. More victims to parade around? No, Tom stepped forward. We're here because we're part of the choice. Porter resumed the video. Bill's voice filled the room again. The foundation must begin by addressing the damage you've both caused. Tom Watson's building, Rachel's eviction victims, they're your first projects. This is ridiculous, Rachel spat. I built my business from nothing. Did you? Sarah asked softly. Or did you build it by destroying others? Michael stood suddenly. Rachel, wait, there's something you don't know. He pulled out his phone, showing her an email. I was going to testify against you. The DA offered me immunity if I provided evidence of your illegal practices. Rachel staggered back as if struck. You...
What?
I was going to do it this morning. Before... He gestured at the envelope. Before this. My own brother, Rachel whispered. Betraying me? Like you betrayed our grandfather? Michael shot back. Trying to have him declared incompetent? Porter raised his hand for silence as Bill's voice continued. You'll have to work together. Every decision must be unanimous. Every project must directly help those you've harmed. And most importantly, you must do it from my apartment. His apartment? Rachel looked disgusted. Where he lived and worked while dying of cancer, Sarah reminded her sharply. While you were buying sports cars with eviction money. Tom Watson stepped forward, placing a worn photo album on the table. Your grandfather asked me to show you this today. The siblings leaned forward as Tom opened the album. Photos spilled out. Bill helping elderly customers with their groceries. Bill celebrating Christmas with homeless families. Bill reading to children at a shelter. This was your grandfather's real empire, Tom said quietly. Not the supermarket chain, not the real estate. This. Porter slid 2 documents across the table. You have a choice to make. Sign these papers renouncing your current careers and committing to Project Grace, or walk away with nothing but the consequences of your actions. Rachel's hands shook as she stared at the papers. Everything I built was built on the pain of others, Sarah finished. Your grandfather gave you a chance to rebuild it the right way. Michael picked up his pen, then hesitated. Rachel, remember when we were kids? Before money became everything? Remember how proud Grandpa was when we helped at the store's food drive? Rachel's mascara streaked as tears finally fell. He let us wear those stupid vests, made us honorary employees. The video continued, Bill's voice growing, softer. My dearest grandchildren, this is your moment of truth. Not about money, but about who you really are, who you could be. Porter stood. We'll give you 10 minutes to decide, but remember, it must be unanimous. As the others left the room, Rachel and Michael sat in silence, the weight of their grandfather's legacy pressing down on them. Between them lay 2 pens, 2 signatures lines, and one last chance at redemption. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet room, counting down the moments until their final choice. Porter dimmed the conference room lights as a new video began playing. This time, the image showed a much younger Bill Harrison, standing beside a beautiful woman with kind eyes. That's... Rachel's voice caught. Grace, Michael finished. Our grandmother. The footage was grainy, showing Grace Harrison helping customers at the first SuperValue store, her smile radiant as she stocked shelves and chatted with shoppers. Bill's voice narrated, Your grandmother built this business with me, not just with money, but with heart. Every customer was family. Every employee was precious. But in 1985, Grace got sick, really sick. The video cut to hospital footage, Grace in a bed, looking frail but still smiling. We had no insurance, Bill's voice cracked. I'd invested everything in the stores. The doctor said with proper treatment, she'd have lived. Instead, the video stopped abruptly. Sarah stepped forward holding an old newspaper. December 15th, 1985. Grace Harrison, beloved community member, dies at 43. That's why he was so obsessed with helping people, Michael whispered. Tom's daughter's medical bills, all those families. He couldn't save her, Porter said quietly. But he could save others. Rachel's phone buzzed. Another news alert. Her face went pale as she read, Harrison real estate scandal claims life. Former tenant dies by suicide. Her name was Margaret Chen, Sarah said softly. Remember her, Rachel? 72 years old, taught kindergarten for 40 years. You gave her 48 hours to leave her home. I didn't. Rachel's hands trembled. I didn't know. Like you didn't know about the Thompson family? Michael's voice was sharp. Or did you just not care? Porter inserted another DVD. This time, Bill appeared in his hospital bed, wearing his familiar blue vest even there. "I recorded this 3 days before I died." Bill's voice was weak but clear. "The doctors gave me a year. I lasted 13 months. Every day I worked at the store, watched my grandchildren, and documented everything. Not for revenge, but for this moment." The camera panned to show a wall of photos behind his hospital bed, hundreds of faces, all people he'd helped. "Your grandmother died because we couldn't afford treatment," Bill continued. "She died in a system that values profit over people, and now my own grandchildren have become part of that system." "Stop," Rachel whispered, but Porter shook his head. "You need to hear this." The video continued. "Rachel, my darling girl, who once cried when we had to turn away a homeless man from the store. Now you turn away families by the dozens. Michael, who wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, now evicts the very people you swore to protect." Michael's phone rang, the law firm's name flashing on screen. Tom Watson was being served eviction papers at that very moment. His finger hovered over the accept button. "Don't," Sarah said quietly. "Not yet." On screen, Bill's voice grew stronger. "I had a choice when I got my diagnosis. Hide in my mansion, protect my fortune, die comfortable but ashamed. Instead, I chose Grace's way. I chose to see the truth, and to make you see it too." Rachel stood abruptly. "He was dying the whole time? While packing groceries? While you were trying to have him declared incompetent?" Porter finished. "Yes." The monthly withdrawals, Michael realized. Each one matched with someone we'd hurt. He was following our destruction with his own kind of construction. Bill's final words filled the room. "I'm leaving you a choice, my darlings. Not between wealth and poverty, but between who you are and who you could be. Grace died because of a system that prioritizes profits over people. What will be your legacy?" The screen went dark, leaving Rachel and Michael in silence. Outside, protesters could still be heard in front of Rachel's office. Michael's phone buzzed again, the firm demanding an answer about Tom's eviction. "There's one more thing," Porter said, placing a small box on the table. "Your grandmother's last letter to your grandfather. He wanted you to read it today." Rachel's hand shook as she opened the box, pulling out a yellowed envelope. Together, the siblings began to read Grace's final words, their grandmother's voice reaching across decades to touch their hearts at their lowest moment. The weight of truth pressed down on them like a physical thing, forcing them to see themselves clearly for the first time in years. Outside, the sun began to set on the empire they'd built, while inside, the possibility of a new dawn waited in the words of a dying man, and the legacy of a woman who understood that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The small TV in Bill Harrison's apartment crackled to life, the screen filling with static before clearing to reveal Bill's face, recorded in his final days. Rachel and Michael sat on their grandfather's worn couch, shoulders touching for the first time in years. "My dearest grandchildren," Bill began, his voice weak but determined. "If you're watching this, you've discovered everything. The letters, the photos, the truth about Grace, and most importantly, the truth about yourselves." The camera panned to show Bill's modest kitchen table covered with papers and photos. "Project Grace isn't just a foundation," he continued. "It's a network, a web of lives interconnected by kindness, built one person at a time. Let me show you." The video cut to different locations: a soup kitchen, a medical clinic, a community center. At each spot, familiar faces appeared. "Sarah Thompson," Bill's voice narrated. "When you meet her again today, she won't just be a waitress to you anymore, will she, Rachel? She's the woman who feeds 50 homeless people every Sunday from her own pocket." Sarah stepped forward from the corner of the apartment where she'd been quietly watching. "Your grandfather matched every meal I provided." The video continued, showing Tom Watson at a youth center. "Michael, remember Tom? Not just the maintenance man you fired, but the man who, even after losing everything, volunteers teaching kids how to read. Tom emerged from the kitchen, holding a stack of children's books. Bill bought these for our program, said they were from an anonymous donor. One by one, people began entering the small apartment. Faces from the photos, names from the letters. Mrs. Chen's daughter clutching her mother's recipe book. Emily Thompson holding a journalism award for exposing housing discrimination. These are your people. Bill's voice grew stronger. The ones you overlooked, stepped over, pushed aside. But they're also your salvation. The siblings watched as the apartment filled with the living testament of their grandfather's secret life. Each person held something, a letter, a photo, a memento of Bill's kindness. Project Grace has 3 parts, Bill explained. First, the money, $10 million to help those in need. Second, the network, these people who will help guide you, support you, and yes, hold you accountable. Rachel wiped tears from her eyes as she recognized faces from eviction notices she'd signed. Michael's hands trembled as he saw families he'd helped displace. And the third part? Bill smiled. That's the miracle. Watch. The video showed Bill in his SuperValue vest, helping a young mother count. Food stamps. Karen here, he narrated, now runs our food assistance program. Karen stepped forward, wearing a familiar blue vest. Daniel, the video continued, showing a homeless man Bill had helped, now manages housing transitions. Daniel emerged, holding keys to several shelter properties. One by one, Bill introduced them all, people he'd helped who had gone on to help others, creating an ever-expanding circle of compassion. This is your true inheritance, Bill's voice filled the room. Not money, not property, but the chance to be part of something bigger than yourselves. Every person in this room has agreed to help you, if you're willing to change. The final scene showed Bill back in his apartment, looking directly into the camera. Grace died because we lived in a world where money meant more than mercy. I spent my fortune trying to change that world, one person at a time. Now it's your turn. Porter stepped forward with 2 blue SuperValue vests, identical to Bill's. Your grandfather had these made specially. If you accept Project Grace, these are your uniforms. Rachel touched the worn name tag. Rachel, happy to serve. Michael held his own, fingers tracing the embroidered letters. The choice is yours, Bill's voice concluded. But remember, these people believe in second chances. They believed in me when I was just a millionaire trying to become a good person. And they're willing to believe in you too. The video ended, but the room remained full. Dozens of lives touched by Bill Harrison, waiting to see if his grandchildren would continue his legacy. Sarah stepped forward holding Grace's photo. Your grandmother used to say that true wealth is measured by how many lives you make better. Today, you get to start counting. The siblings stood together, surrounded by their grandfather's real legacy. Not an empire of buildings and bank accounts, but a network of hearts and hands ready to help them become the people Bill Harrison always knew they could be. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as Michael Harrison straightened his grandfather's blue vest and approached the microphone. Behind him stood Tom Watson and his family. Your Honor, Michael's voice carried across the hushed courtroom moments later. I'm here today not as an attorney but as a witness for Mr. Watson. The judge peered over her glasses. Mr. Harrison, weren't you until recently representing the opposing side in this eviction case? Yes, Your Honor. That's why my testimony is crucial. Michael took a deep breath. I have evidence of systematic discrimination and illegal practices in these eviction proceedings. In the gallery, Rachel sat with Sarah Thompson, both wearing their SuperValue vests. Rachel's hands clutched a folder labeled Watson Defense, Housing Rights Initiative. Objection! Richard Mitchell, Michael's former law partner, shot to his feet. Mr. Harrison has a conflict of interest. The only conflict, Michael replied calmly, was between who I was and who I needed to become. I have here documented evidence of predatory practices spanning 5 years. 2 hours later, Tom Watson embraced his family on the courthouse steps, tears streaming down his face. "Case dismissed!" Emily Watson shouted to the cheering crowd. Michael found himself face to face with his former partner. "You're finished in corporate law," Richard snarled. "I know," Michael smiled, straightening his vest. "That's the point." Across town, Rachel stood in the community center's packed meeting room, facing a sea of familiar faces, her former eviction victims. "The Harrison Housing Initiative," she announced, her voice shaking slightly. "We'll begin with these 12 properties." She gestured to a map behind her. "Each building will be converted into affordable housing units, with current residents given first priority." Sarah stepped forward, pointing to the plans. "Rachel's not just providing housing. Each building will include community spaces, daycare facilities, and job training centers." An elderly woman raised her hand. "Why should we trust you now, Ms. Harrison?" Rachel removed her designer jacket, revealing her grandfather's vest underneath. "Because I'm not Ms. Harrison anymore. I'm just Rachel, and I'm happy to serve." She turned to Sarah. "Would you like to tell them about your new role?" Sarah beamed. "I'll be managing the food security program. Every building will have a community kitchen and food pantry." The meeting continued as Rachel outlined the details: rent control guarantees, maintenance commitments, educational programs. With each point, the skeptical faces began to soften. Later that evening, Michael and Rachel met at their grandfather's apartment, now the headquarters of Project Grace. "How did the Watson case go?" Rachel asked, arranging folders on Bill's old desk. "Complete victory. The firm's entire eviction strategy was exposed." Michael smiled. "Tom's already helping us identify other vulnerable buildings." "Good. Because look what Sarah found." Rachel spread out a map marked with red dots. "Every property I ever turned into luxury condos. Grandfather kept track of where everyone went. And most of them are still in crisis. But now," she pointed to a stack of papers, "we have the resources to help them. All of them." A knock at the door revealed Tom and Sarah, carrying boxes of super value groceries. "Special delivery," Tom grinned. "Figure we all need dinner if we're planning the next phase." They gathered around Bill's small kitchen table, the same one where he'd planned his own missions of mercy. Sarah began unpacking the food while Tom spread out building plans. "You know," Rachel said softly, "I used to be embarrassed when Grandfather wore this vest. Now it's like armor," Michael finished, reminding us who we're really fighting for. The door opened again as Emily Watson arrived with more community members. Soon the small apartment was filled with voices, plans, and purpose. "Your grandfather would be proud," Sarah said, watching Rachel help a former eviction victim fill out housing forms. Michael looked up from where he was reviewing cases with Tom. "We're not doing it for pride anymore. We're doing it because it's right." As the evening went on, the small apartment buzzed with energy. Former victims becoming advocates, past enemies becoming allies, all united under the simple mission spelled out on their blue vests: happy to serve. The path to redemption wasn't easy, but with each small act of justice, each life touched, each wrong made right, Michael and Rachel Harrison were discovering what their grandfather had known all along: that true wealth wasn't in what you had, but in what you gave away. 1 year to the day after Bill Harrison's funeral, a crowd gathered outside his modest apartment building. The old Super Value sign still hung across the street, but now it shared the block with a new addition: a gleaming brass plaque reading, "The Grace Harrison Foundation, where every life has value." Michael and Rachel Harrison stood side by side, both wearing their now familiar blue vests. The crowd before them wasn't filled with real estate moguls or corporate lawyers, but with faces that told stories of transformation. hundreds of lives touched by their grandfather's legacy and their own journey to redemption. A year ago, Rachel began, her voice strong and clear. I stood in this very spot wearing designer heels and $1,000 suit, wondering how my grandfather could have fallen so far. Today, I understand he never fell, he rose, and he was trying to lift us all with him. She gestured to Sarah Thompson, who stepped forward with a large display board. The Grace Harrison Foundation isn't just a charity, it's a promise. Every building I once converted to luxury condos will become what we're calling a Grace Space, affordable housing, with integrated community services. Sarah unveiled the plans, pointing to different areas. Each Grace Space will include a community kitchen, job training center, daycare facility, and most importantly, an outreach office staffed by former residents who understand the challenges our families face. Because that's what my grandfather taught us, Rachel continued. It's not enough to provide housing, we have to provide hope. Michael stepped to the podium next, adjusting his vest. While my sister transforms properties, we're transforming the legal landscape. I'm proud to announce that Harrison and Mitchell law is no more. He paused as murmurs rippled through the crowd. In its place, we've established the Harrison Community Justice Center. Tom Watson joined him at the podium, now wearing a suit with his own blue vest underneath. As the center's new director of housing advocacy, I can tell you that every attorney who joins us has one mission: to protect the vulnerable from the very predatory practices we once enabled. Emily Watson, Tom's daughter, raised her hand from the press section. Mr. Harrison, how do you respond to critics who say this is just an elaborate PR stunt? Michael smiled. I'd invite them to check our financial records. They're completely public. Rachel and I donated every penny we had to the foundation. We live in this building now, just like our grandfather did. Our salaries are the same as every other foundation employee. And what about your former clients? Emily pressed. The developers? The corporate interests? They're welcome to join us in changing the system, Rachel interjected. But we're not interested in profits anymore. We measure success differently now. She motioned to Mrs. Chen's daughter, who wheeled forward a large screen. These are our quarterly reports, not in dollars, but in lives changed. The screen filled with the statistics. 247 families housed, 89 evictions prevented, 523 legal cases won, 122,100 people in job training, 15,000 meals served. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Rachel continued. Sarah? Sarah approached the podium with an elderly woman, Mrs. Martinez, who had once been evicted from her home of 40 years by Rachel herself. A year ago, Mrs. Martinez spoke softly. I was living in my car. Today, I run the senior outreach program at our downtown Grace Space. We've helped 30 elderly residents stay in their homes. The crowd's attention turned as moving trucks began arriving at the building. These trucks, Michael explained, aren't here to move people out. They're bringing people home. Today, we're welcoming back 15 families who were displaced by our former practices. Mrs. Thompson? Sarah stepped forward again. Each family will receive not just housing, but a complete support system, job placement, healthcare coordination, educational support, everything my family didn't have when we were evicted. Rachel wiped a tear as she watched the first family approach. A single mother with 3 children she had personally evicted 2 years ago. Instead of serving them paper, she now handed them keys. Your grandfather, the mother whispered, hugging Rachel. He helped us find temporary housing when you evicted us. He never told you? No, Rachel smiled through tears. He let us learn the hard way, but we finally learned. Inside the building, Bill's small apartment had been transformed. The boxes of evidence that had exposed his grandchildren's misdeeds were replaced with success stories. Walls covered with photos of families helped, lives changed, communities rebuilt. This room, Michael addressed the gathered crowd inside, is where our grandfather planned his secret missions of mercy. Now it's where we plan ours, but they're not secret anymore. Tom Watson unveiled a new addition to the wall, a large portrait of Bill and Grace Harrison from their first store opening. The Harrison legacy isn't about real estate, empires, or legal dynasties, he said. It's about this moment captured here. Two people who believe business could be both profitable and compassionate. Rachel approached the portrait, touching it gently. We never knew our grandmother, but through Project Grace, we finally understand her. Every person who comes through these doors is treated like family, just as she would have wanted. Sarah opened Bill's old diary, now preserved in a display case. Bill wrote something here that guides everything we do. He said, "Grace taught me that wealth isn't what you have in your vault, but what you build in people's hearts." The ceremony continued as Michael and Rachel presented the foundation's expansion plans. But the real story was happening in small moments throughout the building. In the community kitchen, Rachel helped Mrs. Chen's daughter teach a cooking class using her mother's recipes. "My mother would be so proud," she told Rachel. "Her legacy lives on in every meal we serve." In the legal aid office, Michael sat with a young lawyer, a former adversary from his corporate days. "I never thought I'd be working pro bono," the lawyer admitted. "But after seeing what you've built here," Sarah led tours of the new facilities, a state-of-the-art computer lab for job training, a childcare center named after Grace, a rooftop garden where residents grew fresh produce, a medical clinic offering free care to residents. "The most important room," Sarah explained, "is this one." She opened the door to a small office filled with blue super value vests. Every new employee, from lawyers to maintenance staff, starts by working in community service, just like Bill did. As evening approached, the crowd thinned, leaving just the core team in Bill's old living room. Rachel and Michael sat on their grandfather's worn couch, now the centerpiece of what they called the heart room. "Do you remember," Rachel asked softly, "the day we found out he was working as a bag? Boy, I was so angry, so embarrassed. Now look at us," Michael smiled, straightening his vest, "fighting over who gets to work the weekend shift at the community store." Sarah brought out a cake, Mrs. Chen's recipe, and they gathered around Bill's small kitchen table. Tom Watson raised a glass of water in a toast to Bill Harrison, who taught us that true wealth isn't in real estate portfolios or legal settlements, Michael added, but in the lives we touch, Rachel finished. As they celebrated, more photos were added to the wall, new stories of hope joining the old. A young mother receiving keys to her first stable home, a former eviction victim now running a job training program, a child who once lived in a shelter now playing in the Grace Space daycare. The final moment came as the sun set. Rachel and Michael stood at their grandfather's window, watching the city lights come on. Behind them, the apartment buzzed with purpose. Sarah planning next week's outreach, Tom reviewing cases, residents dropping by with updates and questions. "You know what I realized?" Rachel said quietly. "We're richer now than we ever were before." Michael nodded, watching a family move into their new home below. "Grandfather knew it all along. This is what real success looks like." On the wall, Bill and Grace Harrison smiled down at their transformed grandchildren, their legacy no longer measured in dollars and cents, but in lives renewed, hope restored, and a new generation learning that true wealth grows not from what you take, but from what you give. The Grace Harrison Foundation was more than a charity. It was a living testament to the power of transformation, a reminder that it's never too late to choose a different path, and proof that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what's left in a will, but what's built in the heart. As night fell on the city, the lights in Bill's apartment stayed on, just as they had during his late-night planning sessions. But now, Instead of one man secretly fighting against greed, an entire community worked together openly, proving that his greatest legacy wasn't the money he gave away, but the change he inspired in the hearts of those who needed it most, his own grandchildren. The true legacy of Bill Harrison lived on, not in buildings or bank accounts, but in every life touched, every family housed, every wrong made right, and every heart open to the simple truth he had lived by, that serving others is the highest calling, and that true wealth is measured not in what you own, but in who you become. That's all for today's story, but the real ending depends on you. What would you have done in Michael and Rachel's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you believe in second chances. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of storytellers and never miss another life-changing tale. Remember, just like Bill Harrison taught us, your legacy isn't written in your bank account, but in the lives you choose to touch.